So, I am staring at this little verse, and it feels completely hostile to everything we are told a blessing should be.
It really does.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a single, highly compressed line of ancient text.
We're looking at Genesis chapter 49, verse 19.
Yeah. You know, usually when you hear the word blessing, especially from a dying father to his son, there is a very specific, very comfortable expectation.
Right, you expect a warm embrace.
Exactly. Precisely. You imagine words of peace, guarantees of prosperity.
Maybe a vision of a quiet life surrounded by green pastures.
Yeah. The father points to a serene horizon and says, "There is your future, safe and sound."
But then you step into the actual unvarnished reality of patriarchal prophecy.
It is a shock to the system. You step into the covenant blessings of the Old Testament, and suddenly that comfortable framework shatters.
It really falls apart.
The text we're looking at today covers the patriarch Jacob's deathbed blessing over his son Gad.
Just one single line of Hebrew.
Right, but this single Hebrew line contains an entire theology of conflict, providence, and divine reversal.
It is massive.
Our mission for this deep dive is to analyze how these 6 Hebrew words completely dismantle the modern, synthetic, and frankly, plastic gospels that promise an easy life.
Oh, absolutely.
We are going to see how this verse takes a wrecking ball to those false promises, replacing them with a realistic, battle-tested hope for the Christian pilgrimage.
The sheer density of the revelation here is just, well, it is staggering.
Yeah.
We are talking about a tiny fraction of a chapter that modern readers routinely skip right past.
Oh, all the time. People read the book of Genesis, they hit chapter 49, they see this long, ancient list of tribal names and animal metaphors.
And their eyes just glaze over.
Right. They assume it is ancient geopolitical trivia.
Or maybe some obsolete poetry that does not apply to their modern lives.
But if you slow down, if you examine the actual mechanics of what God communicates through the dying breath of Jacob, you find a devastating critique of how we view our own trials.
This little verse is a theological earthquake.
Wow, an earthquake.
It really is. It forces you to rethink the nature of suffering, the nature of divine favor, and the absolute certainty of the final victory.
I am fascinated by how a few syllables can carry that much theological weight.
It is incredible.
When you unpack this verse, you find the entire shape of the Christian life compressed into one breath.
You really do.
But to really grasp what is happening here, we cannot just jump into the grammar. We have to set the historical stage.
Right. The background is key.
We have to understand the geopolitical reality. So I want you, the listener, to transport your mind back to the year 1850 BC.
We are in the land of Egypt.
Yeah. The atmosphere in the room is heavy. The smell of death is in the air.
Jacob, the patriarch who literally wrestled with God in the dirt, is dying.
He has gathered his 12 sons around his bed to look them in the eyes and declare what will happen to them in the days to come.
And we have to recognize the massive layers of history operating simultaneously in this moment.
What do you mean by that?
Well, yes, Jacob speaks these words in 1850 BC in an Egyptian room. But Moses is the one who actually records this text under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, right. Centuries later.
Precisely. Moses writes this down around 1406 BC.
And his audience is totally different.
Yeah, he is presenting this text to a very specific, very anxious group of people. He is handing this scroll to the wilderness generation.
These are the Israelites standing on the dusty plains of Moab.
Right, staring across the Jordan River at a highly militarized pagan territory called Canaan.
They are about to enter a brutal generational war.
And they are terrified.
Naturally.
They need to understand that the bloodshed they are about to experience is not an accident.
It is not a failure of God's plan.
No, it is the execution of a predetermined covenantal map.
And when you look at that map, the specific geography assigned to Gad is startling.
It really is.
To grasp Gad's blessing, you have to look at the historical events recorded later in Numbers chapter 32.
Right, the inheritance of the land.
Yeah, the tribe of Gad possessed massive, sprawling herds of livestock.
Because of this economic reality, they looked at the territory on the east side of the Jordan River.
The lands of Jazer and Gilead.
Yes, and they requested that specific land for their permanent inheritance.
This is the region known as the Transjordan.
The grass was green, the land was wide.
But this specific eastern frontier made them incredibly vulnerable. They were totally exposed to the wilderness.
If you look at the topographical layout of the covenant land, Gad's placement is breathtakingly dangerous.
Breathtakingly dangerous. Why?
Well, the central tribes of Israel were protected by massive geographical features.
Right.
They had the deep, plunging rift of the Jordan Valley, acting as a massive natural trench on one side.
Okay, that is a huge defensive advantage.
And they had the rugged, towering hill country of Ephraim acting as a fortress on the other.
But Gad did not have those natural defenses.
No. Gad was stationed on the rugged, open plateau east of the Jordan, directly bordering the vast, inhospitable Arabian desert.
So they were positioned on the absolute edge of the covenant boundary.
They were the shield wall for the rest of the nation.
Wow. It is like they were the ultimate buffer state.
Yes, that is a perfect analogy.
If you think about modern geopolitical conflicts, the buffer state is the territory that absorbs the first, most devastating blow of any invasion.
Gad was the absolute front line of a constant, grinding, merciless conflict.
And the enemies they faced were not standard, predictable armies.
Not at all.
They did not fight disciplined imperial legions marching in straight lines with polished shields and predictable tactics.
No, they fought the groups that the Hebrew text calls the Gedudim.
The Gedudim, what does that look like?
These were sudden, predatory, guerrilla-style raiding bands coming out of Moab, Ammon, the Arameans, and the Hagrids.
Guerrilla warfare in the ancient world.
Yeah. These raiders would strike without a declaration of war. They would wait for the harvest season.
Wait for the cover of darkness.
Right. Then they sweep across the borders, burn the crops, seize the cattle, slaughter the isolated families.
And then vanish back into the desert before a standing army could even be mobilized.
It was a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
Which brings up a massive question regarding the governance of the world.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Did God place the tribe of Gad in this highly exposed geographic location by accident?
Was it just a piece of bad real estate luck?
In a simple consequence of their desire for good pasture.
The text forces us to acknowledge a much heavier reality.
It does. God intentionally stationed Gad in the path of the raiding bands.
Gad's vulnerability was not a lapse in divine oversight. It was a deliberate, sovereign placement.
The soil of Gad was appointed to be soaked in the blood of foreign invaders.
Their daily existence demanded a state of perpetual vigilance.
Because God decreed that their faith would be forged in the fires of border warfare.
He put them where the fighting was the fiercest.
Yes.
What blows my mind is that this physical, gritty geography perfectly mirrors the literary layout of Genesis chapter 49.
The Holy Spirit arranged the poetry to reflect the physical map.
Yeah. Jacob addresses his sons in a sequence that roughly follows their birth order and their respective mothers.
He balances the sons of his wives, Leah and Rachel, with the sons of the handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah.
Gad is the son of Zilpah.
And the contrast within this sequence is brilliant.
How so?
Well, Jacob starts with a heavy, majestic promises given to Judah. He speaks of the royal scepter.
The washing of garments in wine.
Teeth whiter than milk. It is a soaring prophecy of absolute kingdom dominion.
But the text does not stay in the royal courts.
No, it moves rapidly from the messianic heights of Judah straight into the gritty, survival-oriented reality of the border tribes.
Gad receives his blessing right in the middle of this intense, rapid-fire sequence of short, sharp pronouncements.
And look at the specific textual neighbors Gad has in this chapter.
Okay, let's look at the verses right around it.
Right before Gad's blessing, in verse 18, Jacob suddenly breaks the poetic rhythm and cries out, "I wait for your salvation, O Lord."
Wow. It is a desperate, exhausted plea for deliverance from an old man who has seen a lifetime of sorrow.
And then, right after Gad's blessing, in verse 20, we get the blessing of Asher,
which predicts abundant agricultural harvests and royal delicacies.
So Gad is sandwiched directly between a desperate cry for salvation and the enjoyment of a royal feast.
That structural placement acts as a set of literary guardrails.
Absolutely. The Holy Spirit ordered the text this way to prevent any kind of cheap triumphalism.
By placing the bloody, violent battle cry of Gad right after the solemn prayer for salvation, the text alerts the reader that the wait for salvation is characterized by intense earthly warfare.
Before the people of Israel can sit down to enjoy the royal delicacies of Asher, they must halt at the blood-stained, battle-tested plains of Gad.
We want the crown without the cross.
Always.
We want the royal dainties of Asher without having to hold the line against the raiders of Moab.
But the text will not let us bypass the battle.
That is the natural reaction of the fallen human mind, though, isn't it?
Yeah, we desire comfort over holiness. We want the victory. but we despise the means God ordains to secure that victory within us.
The literary structure forces us to accept that God uses the rating bands to purge our self-reliance.
Think about it. If Gad was placed in the center of the camp, completely shielded from the enemy, Gad would never learn the fierce, desperate dependence on God that border warfare requires.
The warfare is not a punishment for Gad.
No, it is the ordained mechanism for their sanctification.
It is how God forms a warrior out of a shepherd.
God uses the violence of the frontier to strip away all illusions of self-sufficiency.
So if God intentionally placed Gad in this physical danger, how did Jacob actually communicate that doom to his son?
When you look at the words he used, you find a microscopic, incredibly intense grammatical structure.
Let's look at the anatomy of this verse. It has 3 distinct movements.
Let's break them down.
The first movement describes the initial assault. The Hebrew phrase is Gad Gedud Yegudanu.
You could hear the drumming sound just saying it.
Gad Gedud Yegudanu. It sounds like hoofbeats.
Yeah, there is a triple alliteration built entirely on the consonantal root, GDD.
The linguistic mechanics here are staggering. That root, GDD, literally means to cut, to penetrate, or to crowd in.
From that root, we get the noun gedud, which means a predatory rating band,
And then we have the verb yegudanu.
meaning they shall assault him or they shall cut into him.
The syntax depicts Gad being surrounded, penetrated, and temporarily broken.
The initial clause contains absolutely no hope.
None.
It is a raw, unvarnished declaration of military disaster.
The enemy breaches the wall, the defense fails, Gad is overrun.
The grammar itself mimics the overwhelming, suffocating reality of a night raid.
The authorial word choice here is so deliberate and so terrifying.
It is.
Moses could have used standard Hebrew words to describe an enemy.
He could have used oyeb, which just means a hated enemy.
Or zar, which means an oppressor. He could have used the standard verb lashatz, which means to crush.
But he did not. He tied the very name of the tribe, Gad, to this root of being raided and cut into.
If Moses had used those common words, the focus would have been on the external strength of the pagan nations.
But by using the GDD root, the name of the tribe itself becomes a living prophecy.
Wow. Whenever a Gadite heard his own name called out across the camp, he was hearing his destiny.
He knew by the very syllables of his identity that he was born to be assailed.
He was born to face the truth.
God wrapped their suffering and their calling into their very name.
Your name is Gad, and therefore the Gedud will come for you.
It is inescapable.
Then we hit the second movement. The verse does not end with the assault.
No, there's a grammatical pivot.
It all hinges on a single monosyllabic word, wihu.
It translates to, but he himself.
In Hebrew syntax, this is a sudden, violent grammatical hinge.
It is a tiny conjunction attached to an independent pronoun.
And when you see the specific construction at the beginning of a clause, it breaks the flow of everything that just happened.
It introduces a sudden, radical shift in agency. It means on the contrary, or nevertheless, he.
The text strips the invading troop of their temporary victory and transfers the active conquering agency right back to the assailed patriarch.
The action flips entirely.
The oppressed becomes the oppressor,
The hunted becomes the hunter.
which leads right into the third movement, the reversal. The phrase is Yagud Akob.
He shall overcome at the heel.
I love this part. This does not mean a tiny little dog nipping at someone's heels.
Right. The word aquob refers to the rear guard of an army.
The military reality being described here requires a bit of historical context.
In ancient warfare, striking the heel meant attacking the rear flank of a retreating enemy.
It is the most vulnerable part of a routed army.
When an army breaks and runs, they drop their shields. Their backs are exposed.
The syntactical movement goes from a front-facing catastrophe where the enemy invades Gad's borders to a rear-facing victory where Gad pursues the enemy and shatters their trailing flank.
It's not surviving the raid. It is executing an irreversible rout.
The enemy came in confident, but they leave utterly decimated.
I picture it like a brilliant battlefield maneuver.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine an army absorbing a massive, devastating blow. They stagger backwards.
To the enemy, it looks like a complete collapse.
The raiders think they have won, so they drop their guard and start gathering the plunder. They start celebrating.
But the collapse was just absorbing the kinetic energy.
Suddenly, the assailed army executes a devastating flanking maneuver.
They sweep around and shatter the enemy's rear lines, completely destroying them.
That is Yagudekup.
And this was not just poetry. This exact syntactical sequence played out in actual historical warfare.
The linguistic structure became flesh and blood on the plains of Gilead.
The biblical evidence for this historical fulfillment is overwhelming.
In 1 Chronicles chapter 5, we read about the sons of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh waging a massive war against the Hagrids.
The text says they won a staggering victory, not because of their own natural brilliance, but because, and I quote, "the war was of God."
The text explicitly notes that they cried out to God in the battle.
They were fighting physical enemies with physical swords, but the victory was entirely theological.
The text credits the sovereign God for the physical defeat of the Hagrids.
And then in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, we see the Gadites joining David when he was a fugitive in the wilderness.
The biblical description of these Gadites is wild.
It calls them men of war, fit for the battle, who could handle shield and buckler.
It says their faces were like the faces of lions, and they were as swift as gazelles on the mountains.
They were absolute lethal weapons.
They were hardened by generations of living in the borderlands Jacob prophesied about.
We even have archaeological confirmation outside the Bible that proves this historical reality.
Yes, the Mesha stele.
Also known as the Moabite stone.
It dates back to the 9th century BC. It was carved by a pagan king of Moab, boasting about his conquest.
But right there in the ancient inscription, he complains that the men of Gad had dwelt in the land of Adaroth from of old.
Even in his boasting, the pagan king proves the stubborn, permanent, unyielding military presence of the Gadites standing against Moab.
They were precisely the wall of defense. Genesis 49 prophesied they would be.
The dirt of the Middle East still holds the stones that verify this prophecy.
I want to observe the tension here.
Okay, what do you see?
On one hand, you have these Gadites with fierce, lion-faced martial skill. They are swift, they are deadly, they are trained for war.
Right.
On the other hand, 1 Chronicles says they won because they cried out to God and relied totally on him.
Yeah, there is a balance there.
How does human courage operate under divine providence without falling into self-reliance? If God is the one winning the battle, if the final outcome is fixed by a sovereign decree, why do they need faces like lions?
That is the big question.
Why do they need to train with a shield and buckler at all?
We have to understand the relationship between the primary decree of God and the secondary actions of men.
Break that down for us.
God does not just decree the final victory. He decrees the means by which that victory is achieved.
So the training and the fighting are part of the decree.
Yes. The Gadites were not passive. They did not sit in their tents waiting for lightning to strike the Hagrids.
God ordained their lion-faced courage, their physical training, and their swiftness as the very instruments he would use to deliver them.
Their courage was dependent courage.
Dependent courage.
They fought furiously exactly because they knew the outcome rested entirely in the hands of the Lord.
They relied on providence, and that reliance fueled their martial skill instead of replacing it.
Trusting God does not mean dropping your sword. Trusting God means swinging your sword with the absolute conviction that God guides the blade.
Wow. When you take this historical reality and apply it to the theological battles facing you, the listener, today, this tiny verse shatters some very modern illusions.
It shatters them completely.
Let's look at the synthetic gospel that promises an easy life.
The prosperity gospel.
Right. The prosperity preachers insist that if you have enough faith, if you speak the right words, if you are truly in the center of God's will, you will experience unbroken health, wealth, and earthly success.
They claim that suffering is a sign of spiritual failure.
But the first clause of this verse, "a troop shall overcome him," completely dismantles that notion.
Gad was squarely in God's will.
Yep.
Gad was operating under a patriarchal blessing.
Gad was physically located specifically where God told them to be.
Yet God decreed that a troop would overcome him.
Temporal loss, physical brokenness, and violent disruption are part of the covenant path.
God permits the raid.
If you evaluate your standing with God based on the absence of trouble, you will be completely destroyed when the raiders show up.
The borderlands are dangerous, and God intentionally puts his people on the borderlands.
This text also confronts the core assumption of human self-determination.
Oh, definitely.
The idea that we can secure our own spiritual borders simply through willpower.
We often think that if we just set our minds to it, if we just build high enough moral walls.
We just read enough self-help books.
Right. We think we can keep the raiding bands of temptation and affliction out of our lives.
We think we are the sovereign masters of our own destiny.
But the human will is not the sovereign force in the universe.
No, it is not.
God sovereignly permits the invasion of the Gadud.
He allows the enemy to breach our defenses, to strip away all our confidence in the flesh.
When you are overrun, when your moral walls collapse, you are forced to realize that your own willpower is completely insufficient to save you.
You are driven to your knees, entirely dependent on the grace of the one who holds the final outcome.
God breaks our reliance on our own strength by letting the troop overrun us,
And we also have to confront the passivity that infects so many churches today.
which is the opposite extreme.
On one side, you have seeker-sensitive church models that hide the necessity of spiritual warfare.
They want Christianity to look like a polished corporate seminar.
They never talk about the rating bands. They never talk about the blood and the mud of the borderlands.
And on the other side, you have this mystic passivity.
The let go and let God mentality.
The idea that true spirituality means achieving a state of blank surrender where you exert no effort at all.
Gad destroys both of those false models.
Gad did not attend the seminar to manage the Moabites.
Nor did Gad sit in a tent in a state of mystical detachment while his cattle were stolen.
Gad engaged in fierce, bloody counteroffensives.
The Christian life requires the active, vigorous mortification of sin.
It requires picking up the shield and the buckler.
You cannot passively watch the enemy burn your crops and claim you are trusting God.
Trusting God means engaging the enemy because you believe God has guaranteed the victory.
I have to challenge this because this is the question every person asks when they encounter the absolute sovereignty of God.
Go ahead.
If the final victory is unalterably predestined by God, if the Wehu, the divine reversal, is guaranteed from before the foundation of the world, why does the believer need to fight at all?
It is a common objection.
Why not just wait for God to strike the heel of the enemy? Why expend the effort if the script is already written?
Because the God who predestined the end also predestined the means. The decree of final victory is not an excuse for laziness. It is the absolute guarantee that your fighting is not in vain.
When a believer engages in the active mortification of sin, when you fight against your own flesh and the temptations of the world, you are participating in the ordained mechanism of your own sanctification.
You fight because God has guaranteed that your sword will strike true.
If you did not have the guarantee of victory, your fighting would be desperate and hopeless.
The certainty of victory is the fuel for the battle, not the substitute for it.
So our victory is totally certain. But where does that certainty actually come from?
It does not come from our own lion-faced courage.
No. It points directly to the final cosmic fulfillment of the text.
When you trace that pattern of suffering before the crown, you cannot help but hit the New Testament.
You hit the cross. Let's trace the pattern of the seed all the way back to Genesis 3, verse 15.
From the very beginning of the biblical record, right after the fall in Eden, God declares a state of total war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent.
The promise was that the serpent would bruise the heel of the seed, but the seed would crush the serpent's head.
The pattern of Gad is the exact same pattern of the Messiah.
It is the pattern of suffering before glory.
It is the bruised heel, followed by the crushed head.
It is the temporal defeat, setting the stage for the eternal conquest.
You cannot have the crushed head without the bruised heel.
You cannot have the empty tomb without the bloody cross.
When you look at Calvary through the lens of Genesis 49, verse 19, you see Jesus Christ surrounded by the ultimate raiding band.
You see the ultimate Gedud.
The Romans, the apostate religious leaders, the demonic forces of hell itself.
Christ was entirely overrun.
On the cross, Jesus Christ was surrounded by the most ferocious raiding band in human history.
He was pressed by Roman executioners, mocked by the crowds, and assaulted by demonic authorities.
The entire force of hell breached his borders. He was overrun.
He was bound, scourged, nailed to the wood, and laid in a sealed tomb.
In earthly terms, the king was permanently overcome.
The troop had won.
The first clause of Gad's prophecy reached its absolute terrifying climax. The Son of God was dead.
But then comes the third day, the resurrection morning.
This is the cosmic wehu.
The divine adversative pivot, the massive grammatical hinge of the universe.
Christ bodily rose from the grave, executing the ultimate reversal.
The Apostle Paul describes this unseen reality in his letter to the Colossians.
He describes exactly what happened in the spiritual realm.
Christ spoiled principalities and authorities, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in the cross.
He did not just quietly escape the tomb, he raided the heel of death itself.
He pursued the retreating forces of darkness and executed a total, irreversible rout.
The resurrection is God the Father looking at the victorious raiding band of hell and saying, but he himself shall overcome at the last.
Death thought it had swallowed the victim, but it swallowed the victor.
And we look forward to the second coming.
We look forward to the return of the victorious warrior king who will execute final judgment and permanently crush the enemies of the covenant.
The sky splits open, and the king rides out to strike the rear guard of every hostile nation and spiritual force that has ever assaulted his people.
The final reversal is coming.
The book of Revelation portrays this with stark, martial clarity.
Christ is not returning as a passive teacher.
He is returning as a conqueror with a sword proceeding from his mouth.
The forces of the earth gather to make war against him, thinking they can launch one final raid against the city of God.
But the decree of God is fixed. The enemies of the covenant will be shattered like clay pots.
The full fulfillment of Gad's blessing is the final, physical, geopolitical, and spiritual triumph of Jesus Christ over the entire cosmos.
Every enemy will be put under his feet.
I'm just struck by the awe-inspiring connection between the bloody dirt of the Transjordan and the cosmic victory at Calvary.
It's amazing.
Gad's small victories, fighting off cattle raiders in the middle of the night, were just shadows.
Tiny echoes of Christ's massive triumph over sin and death.
Every time a Gadite warrior drew his sword and pursued a Moabite raider, he was acting out a prophecy that would only find its true substance in the resurrection of the Son of God.
It forces you to read the Old Testament not as a collection of moral fables, but as the unfolding architecture of redemption.
The Old Testament provides the vocabulary for what Christ would accomplish.
God was staging history. He was setting up the board so that when Christ arrived, the categories of assault, reversal, and total victory were already burned into the minds of his people.
The entire history of Israel was orchestrated for this purpose.
Let's ground this massive cosmic reality into your daily life.
Let's talk about the perseverance of the elect.
Some of you listening right now are living in the first clause of this verse.
You feel completely overrun by a modern raiding band.
The grief is heavy. The assault is relentless.
Let's get specific about what that looks like. Maybe it is a severe medical diagnosis that has breached your physical borders.
You are looking at the test results,
Yep.
and you feel entirely defeated.
Or maybe it is a sudden financial collapse.
The bank account is drained. The job is lost.
And the security you spent years building is swept away overnight by forces you cannot control.
The raiding band took the cattle.
Or maybe it is the crushing weight of cultural hostility.
You stand for truth in your workplace or your community, and the backlash is swift and brutal.
Your reputation is ruined. Your relationships are severed. You are isolated on the borderlands.
Or maybe the raiding band is internal.
A severe, relentless temptation that keeps tearing down your defenses.
You build moral walls, you make resolutions, and then in a moment of weakness, the Gadood sweeps in and overruns you again.
You feel the pain of temporal defeat, and you wonder if you are entirely lost.
You wonder if the troop has won the final victory.
The text demands that we acknowledge that pain.
The Bible does not ask you to pretend that the raiding band is an illusion.
The loss is real. The grief is crushing.
But the doctrine of the perseverance of the elect demands that you look at the entire sentence.
Because you are united to Christ, your story cannot end in defeat.
Those whom God has accepted in his Son can never totally nor finally fall away from the state of grace.
You may be battered, you may be bruised, you may be stripped of all earthly comfort, but your soul is secured by an unyielding decree.
Because the head has overcome the troop, the body will overcome as well.
If Christ has executed the cosmic reversal, and you are hidden in Christ, then your final victory is secured by his blood.
Your security does not rest on your ability to hold the border.
If it rested on you, the Hagrites would destroy you every single time.
Your security rests on the immutable decree of God the Father
The finished work of God the Son.
and the abiding presence of God the Holy Spirit.
The raiders may take your health, they may take your wealth, they may even take your mortal life, but they cannot touch your inheritance.
The final outcome is guarded by God himself.
When you understand this, it changes the entire nature of your struggle.
So the instruction for you is to practice dependent courage.
Stop looking at the size of the raiding band.
Stop obsessing over the weapons of the enemy.
Fix your eyes on the decree of the sovereign king.
Stand firm. Use the means of grace. Read the word. Pray and fight sin.
You move from panic to assurance.
The psychological shift this causes is staggering.
When you realize the victory is guaranteed, you stop fighting out of panic and you start fighting out of assurance.
You engage in the battle not to discover if you will survive, but because you know the enemy's heel is already exposed.
You press forward in sanctification, relying entirely on the grace that has already declared the end from the beginning.
You fight like a lion, because you know the Lion of the tribe of Judah has already secured the field.
I want to ask you directly,
Mm.
what raiding band has breached your borders today?
Are you interpreting God's love by the smoothness of your circumstances, or are you interpreting your circumstances by the sure word of God?
Because if you judge God's disposition toward you based on the presence of the raiders, you will despair.
You will conclude God has abandoned you.
But if you judge the raiders by the decree of God, you will find courage.
You will realize the assault is just the prelude to the reversal.
The raiders are temporary. The decree is eternal.
We have to train our minds to view our temporal defeats as the very anvil upon which God is forging our final victory.
The assault is necessary. The testing is necessary.
It burns away the dross of our self-reliance and leaves only a pure, refined trust in the Lord of hosts.
Gad had to be overrun to learn how to rely on the God who strikes the heel.
We have covered a mass amount of ground today.
We really have. We moved from the exposed, dusty geographical borders of the Transjordan, where Gad faced literal guerrilla warfare.
We walk through the microscopic Hebrew syntax of assault and reversal, seeing how a single conjunction shifts the fate of a tribe.
And we traced that reversal all the way to the absolute triumph of Christ over the grave, securing the final victory for all his people.
From a dying patriarch's breath in Egypt to the plains of Moab, to a bloody cross in Jerusalem.
To the final judgment of the cosmos.
All contained within 6 Hebrew words. It is a stunning trajectory.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Think about the precise moment in a battle when the enemy is absolutely certain they have won.
The wall is breached. The defenders are down.
The plunder is gathered. The enemy is laughing.
Right.
What if that specific dark moment of apparent total defeat is not the end of your story?
What if that exact moment is actually the required setup for God's impending weehoo?
The sudden divine reversal that changes everything.
What if the raiders' triumph is just the prelude to their own destruction?
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We will catch you next time on Reformed Thinking.